Today is 14th February 2025, and you know what? Globally, people would like to be adorned in the colors red and white today, just to commemorate February 14th as Valentine's Day. Well, people have different meanings for Valentine's Day. We'll talk more about that later on the show. I am Blessing Eichie, and this is a special edition, not just because it's the edition that falls on Valentine's Day. It is Friday. Thank God it's Friday. You know how we get all EP and happy when it's Friday, because that marks the end of the working week. Okay, my guys are here, but they refuse to wear red and white, so I do not know if that is a sign that they do not want to give anybody gifts today. But I will collect gifts from both of them, from Dr. Idahosa Osamhanze and Oyinpreye Krumale. Good morning, gentlemen.
Well, I was looking for anybody to promise gift, and I didn't see it. So
I
said, okay, let me.
Where was I? How did I become invisible?
Let me just be on my own. Good Nigeria, it's good to be here again on the front burners.
Yes, Pri.
Good morning to you, Blessing.
So what happened to the red and white?
Good morning to you. It's in my mind, actually.
It's in your mind?
Yes.
But I hope the gift is not in your mind.
The gift. Of course, I've given lots of gifts this morning.
When did you become Santa Claus?
I've given lots. In fact, when you came into, I gave you a gift.
What gift? Because I didn't receive any.
Compliment.
Okay, leave that thing. You answer me.
Compliment. A very nice compliment, like you were looking.
Ladies, I give hope today you are not going to accept compliment as a gift.
It's
like
I
said.
For Val, when you're giving compliment to a lady who is dressed for the season, it's a gift. And
I think Blessing has given the verdict some days back that they should do beyond boxers and singlets.
Well,
and we are looking up to that, we will see beyond boxers and singlets today.
Well, we intend to carry about a scale, so we would weigh the value of your gift. That determines whether you're entitled to more than singlets and boxers. But today is not all about Valentine. There are some very serious issues to attend to, and one of them too is the business of Valentine. But let's get to what the headlines are saying this morning as we move to news headlines analysis. The 2025 budget of 54.99 trillion naira. I wish that 99 had just completed so that we would have 55 trillion naira. But the 2025 budget of 54.99 trillion naira has finally been passed by both the Senate and the House of Representatives. A breakdown of the budget showed 3.645 trillion naira for statutory transfers, 14.317 trillion naira for debt servicing, 13.64 trillion naira for recurrent expenditure, and 23.96 trillion naira capital expenditure. You can call that development fund, with fiscal deficit put at 13.08 trillion naira. Doc and Priye. You know, when the president increased the budget from about 49 trillion naira to over 54 trillion, almost 55 trillion, Nigerians were hopeful and were thinking at a time that perhaps with the surplus that had come in from government's revenue, the deficit would be reduced. But then the president had to come up with some other things that the government wants to spend for, and so the deficit remains at 13.08 trillion naira. Are you satisfied with the component of the 2025 budget which has just been passed?
Well, I think I'm overly satisfied that the National Assembly has eventually reviewed the increase on the budget and is passed. Some people had argued that they would have just passed the old one and then maybe add this one to supplementary. In my view, and I think the government is in huge search for legitimacy, and there's so much trust deficit in the system. What that means to me is that as additional funds are coming into the coffers of government, every fund that government has had to be budgeted, and that for me is where the joy really lies. That, of course, government was sincere enough to declare that they had an additional source of revenue that could be expended in this fiscal year. That said, I knew from day one that it's not going to reduce deficit because the budget itself is very cautious. Like some people had argued that Nigeria need to borrow itself out if it wants actually to meet the yearnings and aspirations of Nigerians, as it were. So at 54 trillion, we are still very cautious about what we are doing, because when you put that side by side, the infrastructure deficit that the nation currently suffers, you will know that this is like a drop of water inside an ocean. Because, like I have always said, Augusto said, Nigeria need to spend between $80 billion to $150 billion annually for 30 years if we must meet our deficit in terms of infrastructure. Now, when you factor this 54 billion, you see that it's not even up to 30 billion in terms of its dollar value. And so it cannot even meet what Augusto is proposing we should do in 30 years to be able to meet up or cover the lost ground in terms of building critical infrastructure that will bring the hope and the aspirations of Nigerians alive. So what we are saying is that government sees additional money, and of course, all the avenue where this money is to be spent is not there. Because if you give us extra money now, if you give us $1 trillion as we speak, there are a whole lot of projects that will take them up. And we are not in want of project because there's so much that has not been done. So to that extent, I feel that the transparency in the system is what excites me, that at least government was sincere enough to say, oh, we have additional source of revenue than the allocations which has been made. But, well, deficit will always be there because the trade deficit between us and other nations in terms of what we earn in dollars and hard currencies. So you are looking at that trading balance will always reflect in our deficit. So much borrowing is still happening. People are worried about the oversubscription of the Euro bond, which added about 7 trillion to our debt profile. And all this are happening, and we're seeing that government is also doing its best to ensure that at the end of the day, the nation actually is better off for it.
Talking about Eurobonds, so that's instruments of raising funds. Eurobonds versus Treasury bills, which would you subscribe to, given the exchange rate and what it takes later on to actually give back to those who had invested into it?
Well, I will advise, for me, I would like the government to go through both.
Okay.
Because both of them are a source of revenue to the government. No, not source of revenue, given our debt profile. So for me, when I looked at the budget that was recently passed, one thing I want to consider, and some of the salient issues I want to point out, is that our recurrent expenditure, our budget deficits, and our debt servicing, they are almost all the same thing. Our budget deficit is about 13 trillion naira. Our recurrent expenditure is about 13 trillion naira, and our recurrent expenditure, I think, should be about 14 trillion naira. So they're all the same thing. For me, I was expecting, though I asked the question the other time, if we are getting 1.2 trillion naira as a way of revenue from the Federal Inland Revenue Service, we are getting 1.2 trillion naira from the Nigerian Customs Service as an additional revenue, which was one of the motivating factors that led to the government having a supplementary budget, and we are getting 1.8 trillion naira from other government-owned enterprises that, the accumulation of which gave us about 4.5 trillion naira thereabout. I was expecting that our budget deficit was going to go down. So if it didn't go down and it remained static, it calls to mind that some of the project that was not there earlier before, when the budget was presented about 47 or 49 trillion naira, about some of the project that wasn't there were brought in there. Some new projects are currently in the budget now. And we must begin to think that if we are going to have additional or supplementary budget, it should reflect on the capital. It should reflect on capital expenditure. And the reason why I want to advocate that it goes through capital expenditure, because since time immemorial, our recurrent expenditure has been above our capital expenditure until recently, about two administrations ago, and I can say from towards about 2-3 and to former President Buhari's administration, and being continued by the current administration, where we started having our current expenditure, our capital expenditure exceeding our recurrent expenditure. I am not equally oblivious of the fact that the government, the current administration, had to take up some economic reforms which made it reflect this way. Floating the Naira is part of it, and also, would I call it removing the fuel subsidy? Well, removing the fuel subsidy because now we started having revenue accumulation both to the federal government and to the state governments. So these are some of the issues. So if these new projects that has been reintroduced into the budget, they do not fall on the capital expenditure for building of infrastructure that could result to the country making more revenue, then I think it means that our debt profile is still going to mount, and we should look for ways to quell that.
Okay, if we're talking about the components
I was quickly just to respond to the last question that you put between Treasury bills and Eurobond, which is actually better, but it's also to look at what role each plays here. Here, Treasury bill, your people are giving you money, but domestic people are giving you money, and that's in Naira. And Eurobond is foreigners actually participating in your gateway to borrowing. So what that means also is that foreigners are also gaining confidence in Nigeria, looking at the short period of that offer and how much was oversubscribed. It means that people are also gaining confidence in our economy. And of course, it opened doors for the receipt of foreign currency that could also help us ameliorate the challenges that we face in terms of our FX management. So to that extent, and I think it is better really for government to look at it, but we must also be wary so that we don't over-accumulate foreign debt that will become a problem for us in terms of servicing and the rest of it in the following year.
So about the budget, let's look at what's for statutory transfers, and that's 3.6 trillion. You know that there's some agencies that have to receive funds even before others, but the question of some of these agencies performing actually in line with the aim for which they were set up is another question. Should we begin to look at begin to assess some of government agencies and then look at how well they are performing? If there are some that should be scrapped, there are some that should be merged. You know, this conversation of merging, scrapping agencies of government have been a recurrent one, even with the Oronsaye reports, and afterwards, some Nigerians feel like some agencies are duplicated, and there is a need to streamline the number of agencies that we have. The statutory transfer alone is gulping 3.6 trillion naira.
Well, I think there are some agencies that the Constitution says this is the exact amount you are going to give to it. There are no negotiations about it. For example, the Nigerian Judicial Council. You have UBEC, a Universal Basic Education Fund. You have the Nigeria Data Development Commission. So these are agencies set up by law, and the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria require that this agency get their money on the first line charge. So what that means is that you don't negotiate it. As money comes, you can't even add that to what you are going to share. It's pushed to those agencies so that they can retain some level of autonomy or independence in terms of determining what their own budget will be and not determine from elsewhere. So that's a component of the statutory transfer. So you're also thinking that we are living in a federation where we are saying that the three arms of government, the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature, should have some semblance of separation of powers so that one can oversee the activities of others, and nobody is trying to muzzle the other. So for you to get some independence and autonomy for for the judiciary, it's quite important that you don't have to make sure that it's the executive that determine what their budgets are. So the Constitution says send the money straight to the judiciary, they determine their own budgets. So I think that's why you find that the judicial institution in Nigeria is massive, given the size of the country and its topography and the various systems of education that we find that are in place. So this is what goes into the judiciary, what goes to the Nigeria Data Development Commission, for example, and now, of course, other regional development commissions are also part of this now, because the law is what is setting them up and said this percentage of our annual revenue must get into these people so that they can be developed.
That's the 13%.
Let's take a look at some of the agencies that benefit from statutory transfers in Nigeria. The National Judicial Council, like you've mentioned, NJC. We also have the Niger Development Corporation, Niger Delta Development Corporation, Universal Basic Education, National Assembly, Public Complaints Commission. Let's look at Public Complaints Commission. What's actually their role? What do they do, actually? Maybe Priya can enlighten us.
You complain.
You complain.
In fact, excuse me. The National Complaints Commission more serves like the ombudsman that we were, supposed to complain to, and it's a federal agency that is established, I think, by the Constitution. So it's where we're supposed to report dissatisfactions and maybe complaints that you receive from public corporations and federal institutions. And it was supposed to be an agency, set up to protect people and protect the rights of people and give listening ears to. But for long, just the way I had been crying out for the operations and the functions of the National Orientation Agency, which, if I make any comparison, I would say the National Orientation Agency is doing far better than the Public Complaints Commission. And it's one of those institutions that we need to call, that the legislative arm of government would need to call to give a 5 years, if not 10 years report of their activities.
No, they do give their report, submit their spendings to the office of the.
I'm not even talking about the spending.
But
I'm talking about the carrying out of their functions.
Of course, they are there. They are functioning. You see, what you need to understand that Nigeria is a federation, and being a federation, we also have a 3-tier federation, which of course you have the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature. Just take it for example. He who pays the piper dictates the tune. Now, if everybody is supposed to report what is not done well, whether it's at National Assembly, whether it's at the executive level, or whether it's even at the judicial level, to an ombudsman who monitors what everybody is doing. And then, of course, they are at the mercy of the Executive Council to determine their budget. Then, of course, you can expect some bias in terms of judgment. So why is the Constitution separating them? Because they are a watchdog to the other 3 tiers of government. And to that extent, they need some level of autonomy and independence. It's just like the universal basic education that has to cut across the 3 tiers of government, the federal, state, and the local government. Now, there's a statutory allocation that gets into these places. How this is disbursed is not the function of the executive arm. That commission determine how to spend their money. And I think this is what it is all about. You may not have to deal with the Nigerian Complaint Commission, but I can tell you civil servants are bombarding them with reports and reports and reports on a daily basis. And the people are working and they are doing their work within the ambit of the law. But because they are not like police you see on the road, you will know whether they are working. And I think the fact that you don't see them...
they don't make the news.
They don't make the news.
They don't make the news in the sense that we have not heard where a PAMSEC or a chief financial operation officer or any of the executive level or maybe down level staff will report some form of complaints to them, and they take it up And we
They
don't see it.
They are not a judicial body.
No, they are not.
And to that extent, even if you
carry out judicial activities,
even if you have to report cases to them, what they do is that they do their due diligence on the cases and send it to the appropriate quarters to do the thorough investigation. So, but what it is that so that the people who are reporting are shielded. That's why you don't want to go to expose yourself to the police or DSS or other paramilitary organizations. So it comes to them and they process it and represent and shield the, just like people talk about the whistleblower principles today. So you go to the ombudsman, they are the judge and able to say, okay, this is right, this is not right, this is what your problems are, and they treat it, especially when it comes to the violations of the rights and privileges of public officers. So that is why they deal with public officers, not really with the general public. And so to that extent, you will not see what they are doing, but on a day-to-day basis, you find that their office are inundated with complaints
and reports.
Yes, and they are working and they are doing their work silently because they are not in they are in the back end, like they say, behind the scene. You hardly will see what their operations are, but they do require a number of funding to be able to carry out this assignment. But why is it on the first line charge? Is because autonomy needs to be for them to do their work and do it very well. Whether the work is done well or not is a different thing. But the intention of the Constitution is to ensure that they are financially independent of the other tiers of government so that they can do things without fear or favor.
Okay, I think that whether or not they do their job well should also be a concern, because if an agency is put on first line charge and they are being budgeted for, then we should also look at how effective they carry out their job. There are millions, according to them, there are millions of complaints and cases that they receive that needs resources to pursue. But I think that there should also be scrutiny on these agencies to know exactly what they're doing, how effective they are. Like the Niger Delta Development Commission and so many other commissions that have been set up for different regions. I think such light should be beamed, and there's not enough for us to be allocating monies to these agencies, whereas the effect of these agencies are not really being felt by Nigerians. These monies could as well go for some other purposes. That's why I raised the question of the Public Complaints Commission. What exactly do they really do? So I think that even if they are not set up for the public directly, but for public offices, for complaints about private companies and or about the government, we should also be they should also be in the news. Like, let's know, let Nigerians know this is taxpayers' money, this is Nigeria's money that are going to these agencies. Let us also know what is happening within those agencies. That's the point here.